The illusion of financial safety. You get your paycheck on Friday, same amount as last time, same amount as the time before that. You pay rent, you pay the electric bill, you buy groceries. There's a little left over, maybe not a lot, but enough. And something in your body settles. Not excitement, not celebration, just a quiet exhale. The feeling that things are okay, that the ground beneath you is solid, that you can stop thinking about money, for a few days at least. You go to work on Monday. Your boss says something dismissive in a meeting. Not cruel, not loud, just dismissive. A wave of the hand, a let's move on before you finished your point. You notice it. It bothers you, but you don't say anything. You just keep going. You tell yourself it wasn't a big deal. You tell yourself you're being professional. You tell yourself you'll bring it up later if it keeps happening. But you won't, and you know you won't, because there's something else. Something you don't usually think about directly. Something sitting underneath every decision you make at that job. Under every email you write. Under every time you pause before speaking. You need the paycheck. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a one missed check and I'm on the street way. At least that's what you tell yourself. But the truth is you've built your life around that deposit showing up every 2 weeks. Your rent depends on it. Your car payment depends on it. Your kids' after-school program depends on it. Your phone bill, your insurance, your groceries, the birthday present you already promised, all of it is built on the assumption that the paycheck will keep coming. And so when your boss is dismissive, you absorb it. When a policy changes and no one asks your opinion, you adjust. When you're passed over for something you earned, you recalibrate your expectations instead of pushing back. You do all of this quietly, automatically, without even framing it as a choice, because the paycheck keeps coming, and as long as it keeps coming, you feel safe. But here's what no one talks about. That feeling of safety, the one that lets you exhale on Friday, is not the same thing as actually being safe. And the distance between feeling safe and being safe is where most of the power in your life quietly operates. What financial safety actually means. Let's start with the simplest version of this. Financial safety means you can absorb a shock without your life falling apart. That's it. Not luxury, not wealth, not a big house or a nice car. Just the ability to handle something going wrong without everything unraveling. Your car breaks down. Can you fix it without borrowing money? Your job disappears tomorrow. No warning, no severance. Can you pay your bills for 3 months while you find another one? Your landlord raises the rent by $200. Can you absorb it, or does it push you to the edge? If the answer to those questions is yes, you have some real financial safety. You have a buffer between your life and disaster. Not a big one, maybe, but something. If the answer is no, even if your paycheck is steady, even if your bills are paid on time, even if your life looks fine from the outside, then what you have is the appearance of safety. You have routine. You have predictability. You have a rhythm that feels solid. But you don't have a cushion. And without a cushion, you are one event away from crisis. One missed paycheck, one unexpected bill, one phone call from a doctor or a mechanic or a school. Most people live in this gap, the space between things are fine right now and things could fall apart quickly. And because things are fine right now, because the paycheck came on Friday and the lights are still on and they don't feel the gap, they feel stable, they feel okay. That feeling is the illusion. It's not a lie anyone told you. It's not a scam or a conspiracy. It's just what happens when the same paycheck shows up enough times in a row. Your nervous system stops treating it as temporary. It starts treating it as permanent. And once it feels permanent, you start building your life on top of it, as if it were the foundation of a house. But it's not a foundation, it's a pattern, and patterns can break. How the illusion forms. The illusion doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly, through repetition, routine, and the quiet absence of anything going wrong. Here's how it usually works. You start a new job. In the first few weeks, you're aware of how fragile everything is. You're new. You haven't proven yourself. You're still learning the systems, the culture, the unwritten rules about who matters and who doesn't. You're careful, a little nervous. You save a bit more than usual just in case. You keep your resume updated. You don't commit to anything expensive. But then the first paycheck comes, and the second, and the fifth, and the 20th. Each one tells your brain the same thing. This is working, this is stable, this will continue. So you adjust. You stop keeping your resume updated. It starts to feel unnecessary, almost paranoid. You stop thinking about what you'd do if this job ended. You sign a new lease. You buy furniture on an installment plan. You finance a car. You let a friend talk you into a vacation you can almost afford. You agree to a streaming service here, a gym membership there, a slightly more expensive grocery store because it's closer to your apartment. None of it seems like much on its own. But slowly, quietly, your expenses rise to meet your income. The margin you had when you started, that little bit of room between what you earned and what you spent, gets thinner with each passing month. And one day, without noticing exactly when it happened, the margin hits zero. Now your life requires that paycheck, not just to be comfortable, but to function. Missing one check wouldn't be inconvenient. It would be an emergency. This is the first layer of the illusion. You went from "I could walk away if I needed to "I can't afford to lose this." And you didn't notice the shift because nothing dramatic happened. No single choice was reckless. No single purchase was extravagant. Each step felt reasonable. Each decision felt small. The problem wasn't any one choice. It was the direction. Always toward more dependence, never toward more freedom. The second layer is social. You look around and see everyone living the same way. Your co-workers carry the same kind of debt. Your neighbors have the same kind of car payments. Your friends are in the same position, paying bills, stretching dollars, counting days until Friday. So your situation doesn't look risky. It looks normal. It looks like what being a responsible adult means. And because everyone around you is doing the same thing, no one questions whether it's actually safe. It just looks like life. And when something is normal, it becomes invisible. You don't question the air you breathe. You don't question the sidewalk under your feet. And you don't question a financial structure that everyone you know shares, even if that structure leaves all of you one bad month away from real trouble. The third layer is emotional. When you've been at a job for a few years, your identity starts to wrap around it. You're not just earning money there. You have a desk, you have a commute you've memorized, you have a lunch spot, you have people who ask about your weekend, you have inside jokes, you know where the good coffee is, you have a place, and leaving, even thinking about leaving, starts to feel like more than a financial decision. It feels like pulling yourself out of a world, like admitting that something you invested years in wasn't working, like starting over from nothing when you're too tired to start over. So you stay, not because you've carefully weighed the options and concluded that this is the best choice available, but because leaving feels too big, too uncertain, too destabilizing. The thing you know, even if it's slowly wearing you down, feels safer than the thing you don't know. That's the illusion doing its work. It's not just telling you that you're safe, it's making the alternative feel dangerous. So dangerous that you never test whether the safety is real. How the illusion changes. Communication. This is where the dynamic stops being about numbers and starts showing up in how people actually talk, write, pause, and interact with each other every day. When you believe, even unconsciously, that you can't afford to lose your job, your communication changes. Not dramatically, not in ways anyone would point to, but consistently in small adjustments that accumulate over months and years, reshaping the way you show up in every conversation that involves someone with more power than you. You soften your disagreements. Your manager proposes a plan that you think has a real flaw. You've seen this kind of approach before. You know what's likely to go wrong in another version of your life, one where you had 6 months of expenses in the bank and 3 companies interested in hiring you. You might say, I think there's a serious problem with this, and here's what I'd suggest instead. But that's not the version of your life you're in. So instead you say, I just want to make sure we've considered. Or, this might be a minor thing, or, I could be totally off here, but what if we also thought about... You're not lying. You're not being dishonest exactly. You're cushioning. You're wrapping your real opinion in so many layers of softness that by the time it lands, it barely has any weight. It sounds like a passing thought, a small suggestion, something easy to dismiss. And it does get dismissed, because you made it easy to dismiss, because somewhere in the back of your mind, you are running a calculation, not in numbers or words, in feeling. And the feeling said, is this worth the risk? What if they take it the wrong way? What if this is the thing that puts me on the wrong side of someone who decides my future at this company? Most of the time, the feeling says, it's not worth it. So you stay soft. You stay small. And the person on the other side of the table, your manager, the director, the VP, never hears what you actually think. They hear the padded version, the one that's been filtered through your financial anxiety, the one that protects the paycheck. They have no idea that's what happened. They think they heard your honest opinion. They didn't. You over-explain when someone questions your work. Someone sends you a message asking about a decision you made. Maybe it's a fair question, maybe it's not. Either way, you don't answer briefly. You can't. You open a new email and start writing. You include context they didn't ask for. You explain the reasoning behind each step. You address concerns no one has raised. You write 4 paragraphs when one would have done. You might tell yourself you're being thorough, professional, detailed. But if you slow down and watch yourself, really watch what's happening in your chest while your fingers are moving, you'll notice something else. You're not answering the question. You're building a defense. You're preemptively closing every gap someone could use against you. Because somewhere, underneath everything, you know that if someone finds a gap, if someone can point to a missed step, an overlooked detail, an unexplained choice, it could become a mark. a note in a performance review, a reason for a smaller raise, a piece of evidence in a conversation that happens in a room you're never invited into. You don't think about it in those exact words, but your body knows. Your hands know. That long email isn't professionalism, it's protection. Your body writes long emails because your body is trying to keep the paycheck safe. You freeze when the tone of a message shifts. Your boss sends a message at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. It's short. Can we talk tomorrow morning? That's it. No context, no emoji, no hey at the beginning, no exclamation point at the end. You read it, you reread it, you read it a third time, looking for clues. You screenshot it and send it to your partner or your friend. What do you think this means? You try to remember if you did something wrong this week. You draft a reply, delete it, draft another one. You wonder whether you should respond tonight or wait until morning. You wonder whether asking about what would seem defensive or reasonable. This is not thoughtful communication. This is a threat response. You're treating a forward message like it might determine the next 6 months of your life. Because in your financial reality, the person who sent it holds that power. They can give you a raise or put you on a performance plan. They can approve your project or reassign you to something nobody wants. They can make your next year easier or harder with a single conversation. And they might have no idea they have that effect on you. They might have sent the message while standing in line at a coffee shop, barely thinking. But you don't know that. So you spiral, and the spiral isn't about the message. It's about the margin. If you had a financial cushion, that message would be mildly interesting. Because you don't, it's a crisis in your nervous system. You stop raising things. This one is the slowest. It takes months, sometimes years. But it's the most damaging thing the illusion does to a person's voice. It works like this. You raise a concern and nothing happens. You flag a problem and it gets waved away. You offer a suggestion and no one follows up. You soften, you cushion, you try different angles, and still nothing lands. After enough rounds of this, a quiet shift happens. You don't make a dramatic decision to stop speaking. You just start speaking less. You mention things later instead of earlier. You frame warnings as observations. You say it might be worth noting instead of this is going to be a problem. And eventually you stop altogether. Not because the problems went away, but because bringing them up started to cost more in energy, in stress, in risk than just living with them. This is what silence looks like when it comes from financial dependence. It doesn't look like fear. It doesn't look dramatic or oppressed. It looks like someone who's checked out. Someone who just does their work and goes home. Someone who doesn't seem to care. But the truth is they cared too much for too long, with too little support. And they stopped talking because talking felt too expensive. How people can misread what's happening. The illusion doesn't just reshape your behavior. It reshapes how everyone around you interprets your behavior. And almost always, they get it wrong. The quiet employee gets labeled as unambitious. A person who stops raising concerns, who stops pushing for their ideas, who comes in and does their work and leaves. They get read as someone who doesn't want more, someone who's content, someone who's hit their ceiling. Their manager writes, meets expectations on their review, and doesn't think twice. But that person didn't lose ambition. They lost their margin. They learned through experience that speaking up didn't change anything except their stress level. So they pulled back, not because they stopped caring, but because they calculated, not in numbers, in their gut, that the cost of being visible was higher than the reward. Their manager sees passivity. What's actually happening is strategic withdrawal under financial pressure. It looks the same from the outside. The cause is completely different. The compliant employee gets rewarded for something that isn't loyalty. Someone who always says yes, who takes on extra projects without complaining, who covers for people who call in sick, who works late when asked and doesn't mention overtime. They get praised for it. They get called reliable, flexible, a real team player. They get a nice line in their review. But what looks like enthusiasm might be compliance. They're not saying yes because they agree with the request. They're saying yes because they can't afford to say no. The mortgage is due on the 1st. Daycare pulls automatically from their account. Their credit card is at the limit. And every interaction with someone who has power over their income gets filtered through that pressure. The person writing the praise doesn't see what's underneath. They see the behavior, and the behavior looks like dedication. So they reward it, and the reward reinforces it, and the reinforcement tightens the loop. And the loop looks from the outside like a healthy working relationship. The person who stays in a bad situation gets judged for staying. Someone stays at a job where they're underpaid, overworked, or treated poorly. From the outside, people ask, if it's that bad, why don't they just leave? They assume staying is a choice. They assume the person is comfortable or lacking initiative or unwilling to do the hard thing. But leaving requires things: savings to bridge the gap between jobs, a network that can produce leads, time to search and interview, energy to start over in a new environment, confidence that the next thing will be better, not worse. Not everyone has those things in equal measure. The person who stays isn't necessarily comfortable. They might be trapped, not by chains or contracts, but by a financial structure that makes the risk of leaving feel bigger than the pain of staying. When someone says, "I can't leave," most people hear, "I won't leave," and they judge accordingly. But "I can't leave" often means the gap between this paycheck and the next one could take apart everything I've built. My housing, my routines, my kids' stability. That's not weakness, it's math. And it's invisible to anyone who's never had to run the numbers. The person who finally snaps gets called unstable. Every once in a while, someone who has been quiet for months, sometimes years, suddenly pushes back. They say something sharp in a meeting. They send a direct email without the usual softening. They resign without a 2-week notice. They say out loud the thing everyone else has been thinking quietly, and everyone around them is surprised. That came out of nowhere. That was unprofessional. I always thought something was off. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years. Years of swallowing disagreements. Years of watching problems go unaddressed. Years of being told, in 100 small ways, that their real opinion wasn't welcome. The container held and held and held until one more thing was too much and it cracked. The outburst isn't a personality flaw. It's the output of a system that rewarded silence right up until the moment silence became impossible. Who benefits from the illusion? The illusion of financial safety doesn't hurt everyone equally, and it doesn't benefit everyone equally. If you're in a position of authority, if you're the person signing the checks, approving the reviews, setting the schedules, deciding who stays and who goes. The illusion works in your favor, not because you designed it, not because you're a bad person, but because a workforce that feels safe enough to stay and anxious enough not to push back is the easiest workforce to manage. You don't have to threaten. You don't have to micromanage. You don't even have to raise your voice. The financial structure does the work for you. People show up. They perform. They absorb changes without argument. They say yes when asked. They don't cause friction. And you might genuinely believe it's because your leadership is effective, or because the culture is strong, or because your team respects you. And some of it might be respect, but some of it is dependence. And the two look exactly the same from where you're standing. The difference matters enormously. A person who follows you out of trust will tell you when something's wrong. A person who follows you out of dependence will tell you what you want to hear. A person who stays out of trust brings you problems when they're still small and fixable. A person who stays out of dependence hides problems until they can't be hidden anymore. And by then, they're expensive. A person who cooperates out of trust will still be there after a hard conversation. A person who cooperates out of dependence will leave the moment they find a way out. Without explanation, without warning, and you'll spend weeks wondering what happened. If you've never tested whether your team's cooperation would survive a genuine disagreement, if you've never created a space where someone could safely say, "I think this is a bad idea," without any consequence, then you don't actually know whether your team trusts you or just needs you. And those are very different things. This dynamic isn't limited to workplaces. It happens in families. A partner who controls the finances, even gently, even without conscious intent, creates the same imbalance. The other person softens their opinions, absorbs small frustrations, avoids conflict. Not because the relationship is healthy, but because financial dependence makes confrontation feel like it could cost too much. It happens between landlords and tenants. A tenant who can't afford to move will tolerate things that should not be tolerated. Late repairs, ignored maintenance requests, boundary violations. Not because they don't mind, but because leaving requires first month, last month, and a deposit they don't have. It happens in friendships where money is unequal. The person with more money sets the terms, picks the restaurants, plans the activities, and the person with less money goes along, not because they agree with every choice, but because pushing back feels like it could cost them the relationship and the access that comes with it. In every one of these situations, the person with more financial security has more freedom to speak, more freedom to push back, more freedom to walk away. And the person with less security adjusts every day, automatically, without naming what's happening, how the pattern sustains itself. The illusion doesn't need anyone to maintain it. It maintains itself through a loop that tightens with every pass. You depend on the income, so you avoid risk. Because you avoid risk, you don't build alternatives. No savings, no side skills, no outside connections, no options. Because you have no alternatives, your dependence deepens. And the deeper the dependence, the more risk you avoid. Each cycle makes the next one feel more necessary. And over time, the loop stops feeling like a loop. It starts feeling like the way things are, like the only way things could be. Let's slow down and watch this happen in a real life. A person has been at the same company for 8 years. Their salary has crept up, but their expenses have crept up faster. They have a mortgage now, 2 kids, a car payment that looked fine on paper when they signed the lease but now sits heavy at the end of each month. They don't love their job. They haven't loved it in years. But every time the thought of leaving crosses their mind, the same thoughts follow. I can't take a pay cut. What if the new place is worse? I'd lose my seniority. The benefits here are decent. My daughter is starting school in September. It's not the right time. Each of those thoughts is reasonable, responsible even. But together they form a wall. And every year another row of bricks goes up. A new loan, a tuition bill, a lease renewal. A commitment that tightens the connection between their life and this specific paycheck from this specific company. Meanwhile, quietly, other things are happening. Their skills are becoming more specialized to how this company does things, less transferable to the outside. Their professional network is shrinking because they don't have the time or energy to maintain it. Their confidence in their ability to start over is slowly fading, not because they've become less capable, but because they haven't tested themselves in a new environment in nearly a decade. The muscle of starting fresh has atrophied. They are becoming more dependent, and the more dependent they become, the less likely they are to do anything about it. Now watch what this does to their voice over those same 8 years. In year 1, they spoke freely. They raised concerns in meetings. They pushed back on bad ideas. They negotiated their role. They had leverage, not much, but enough. They were new, still being courted, and they hadn't yet built a life that required this particular paycheck. By year 4, they're more careful. They still raise issues, but they phrase them diplomatically. They read the room before speaking. They pick their moments. They've learned which conversations are safe and which aren't. By year 8, they mostly stay quiet. They've watched what happens to people who push too hard. They've seen a layoff. They've seen someone managed out after crossing the wrong person. They know the rules now. Not from a handbook, but from years of watching what gets rewarded and what gets punished. And the people above them, they see a steady, reliable, low-maintenance employee. They might even see someone who's coasting and blame it on the person's ambition or ability, not on the financial trap that's been tightening around them for almost a decade. What happens when the illusion breaks? The illusion can hold for a long time, years, decades, but when it breaks fast. A layoff notice, a medical bill, a divorce, a recession, a car that dies on the highway, an expense that doesn't fit inside what's left of the paycheck. One of these things happens, and the gap you've been living in, the invisible space between everything's fine and everything falls apart, opens up beneath you. You can feel it. And you realize that the safety you felt was not what you thought it was. The paycheck was real. The routine was real. The bills getting paid was real. But the feeling of safety was something else entirely. It was just the absence of disruption. And the absence of disruption is not the same thing as being secure. It just feels that way until it doesn't. People respond differently when the illusion breaks. Some panic. They take the first job offered, even if it's worse. They borrow money. They max out credit cards. They go into survival mode, and some stay there for months or years after the initial crisis has passed, unable to stop bracing for the next one. Some freeze. The loss of the familiar pattern is so disorienting that decision-making shuts down. They can't plan, can't prioritize, can't move forward. From the outside, it looks like giving up. From the inside, it's an overloaded system going dark. Some get angry. They feel betrayed, not by a single person, but by the whole structure. The one that let them believe they were safe. The employer that could erase their position after a decade of service. The system that traded their compliance for a promise of stability, then broke the promise without warning. And some people, after the initial shock fades, start to see clearly for the first time. They look back at every word they swallowed, every risk they didn't take, every time they chose silence because the paycheck was too important. And they realize those weren't choices. They were responses to a pressure that never had a name until now. This is the moment the illusion becomes visible. When you can finally see the shape of what was holding you in place. But here's the hard part. By the time most people see it, they're already in crisis. And crisis is the worst possible time to think clearly about the structure of your financial life. You can't redesign the foundation while everything is shaking. What real financial safety looks like. Real financial safety is not about how much money you make. It's about how long you can survive without the income you have right now. That's the whole measure. Can you go 1 month without a paycheck? 3 months? 6? The answer to that question tells you more about your actual safety than your salary, your title, your job description, or the neighborhood you live in. A person making $200,000 a year with $200,000 in annual expenses and no savings is less financially safe than a person making $40,000 with 3 months of living expenses in the bank. The first person has a bigger life, a nicer car, a better address. But the second person has something the first one doesn't: room to breathe. And room to breathe changes everything. When you have room to breathe, you can say no. You can push back in a meeting without your stomach dropping. You can raise a concern without running a risk calculation first. You can take a chance, leave a bad job, try something new, walk away from a situation that isn't working, because the gap between this income and the next one won't break you. Room to breathe doesn't make you reckless. It doesn't make you defiant or careless. It makes you honest. Because when the price of honesty isn't the potential loss of everything you've built, you can afford to say what you actually think. Think about the most direct person you know at work. The one who speaks plainly without wrapping every thought in 4 layers of softness. Who raises problems early. Who doesn't spend 20 minutes editing a 2-sentence message? Chances are that person has options. Maybe savings, maybe skills that are in high demand, maybe a partner who can carry things for a while, maybe a side income, some form of backup that lets them speak without calculating the cost of each sentence. They're not braver than everyone else. They're not more confident by nature. They just have a wider margin. And that margin shows up in their voice every time they open their mouth. Now think about the quietest person in the room. The one who always agrees, who never pushes back, who volunteers for things nobody else wants and doesn't ask for anything in return. Chances are their margin is razor thin, maybe gone entirely. They're not weak. They're not timid by nature. They're constrained. And the constraint shows up in every word they don't say. The difference between those two people isn't personality. It's not confidence. It's not ambition or drive. It's math. The math of what happens if they lose their income next month. One person can survive it, the other can't. And everything else, the way they speak, the risks they take, the words they choose, the things they swallow, flows from that single difference. The quiet negotiation that never happens. Here's something most people never think about. Every time you accept a condition because you can't afford not to, you are participating in a negotiation. You just don't have any leverage. And the other side doesn't even know a negotiation is happening. Your employer announces a new policy you disagree with. Maybe it's a return to office mandate. Maybe it's a restructuring that puts you under a manager you don't trust. Maybe it's a change to your benefits that quietly costs you hundreds of dollars a year. You don't say anything. You read the email, close it, and adjust your life to fit the new terms. That's a negotiation. One side made a demand, the other side accepted it. Terms were set. But there was no conversation, no pushback, no discussion, just silence. And the silence was the agreement. Your landlord doesn't fix the heat for 3 weeks in January. You send one email, no response. You send another, nothing. You think about calling code enforcement. But then you think about the lease, about the deposit you'd lose if things turned hostile, about the cost of finding a new place in the middle of winter with first month, last month, and a security deposit you don't have. So you buy a space heater and stop bringing it up. That's a negotiation. You ran the numbers. You weighed the cost of fighting against the cost of enduring. Enduring was cheaper, not because you were fine with the cold, but because you couldn't afford the alternative. Your partner makes a big financial decision without consulting you. They commit to something expensive. They assume agreement. You feel a flash of frustration, but you don't say anything. Maybe they earn more than you do. Maybe you're not working right now. Maybe the last time you questioned a money decision, it turned into a 3-day argument that left you feeling smaller than before. So you let it go. You adjust your expectations. You absorb it. That's a negotiation. Someone gained something and someone gave something up. But it didn't look like a negotiation because there was no table. No conversation, no back and forth. Just one person deciding and another person absorbing. This is how the illusion of financial safety quietly reshapes entire relationships. Not through arguments, but through arguments that never happen. Not through force, but through force that never needs to be applied. Not through power being exercised, but through power that sits in the room so heavily that the other person adjusts before a single word is spoken. And the person with more power in these moments? They might never realize the adjustment happened. They might think the relationship is easy, that the employee is agreeable, that the partner is laid back, that the tenant doesn't mind. They're reading silence as satisfaction. But silence in the context of financial dependence rarely means satisfaction. It means, I did the math. I can't afford to say what I actually think, so I'm saying nothing and hoping you read that as peace. Closing reflection. Here's what I want you to notice. The next time you hold back at work, the next time you soften a disagreement, or rewrite an email 3 times, or decide a problem isn't worth raising, ask yourself why. Not the surface reason, not I'm being professional, or it's not a big deal, or the timing was off. The real reason, is it because you genuinely believe silence is the right move? Or is it because the paycheck comes on Friday, and somewhere underneath your thoughts, somewhere you don't usually look, you're protecting it? There's no shame in the answer. Most people are protecting the paycheck. Most people are adjusting their words, their tone, their volume, their honest opinion. Not because they want to, but because the financial structure of their life makes honesty feel too expensive. But once you see it, once you notice the calculation happening in real time, mid sentence, mid email, mid meeting, you can't unsee it. You start noticing it everywhere. In the person who trails off instead of finishing their point. In the email that uses 4 paragraphs to say what could have been 1 sentence. In the meeting where the person with the least job security agrees the fastest. You start noticing who speaks freely and who speaks carefully. And instead of calling one confident and the other cautious, you start asking a different question. What does that person have? What cushion, what option, what safety net? That makes honesty feel affordable. The illusion of financial safety is not really about money. It's about what money quietly buys that nobody names. It buys silence. It buys compliance. It buys agreement. It buys a version of peace that looks like stability, but is really just the absence of anyone feeling safe enough to say what they actually think. And the most important thing you can do, not for your career, not for your image, but for the honest shape of your life, is to know the difference between feeling safe and being safe, between choosing to stay and having no other option, between cooperation and compliance, between peace and silence. The difference is small, quiet, easy to miss. But once you see it, everything looks different.